Robert, welcome back to the Qatar Economic Forum.
It's been a year, just like that.
It has. Folks, Robert, as you probably know, is in the mining industry. To be as successful in the mining industry as he's been, you need to be, of course, an entrepreneur, but you also need to be something of a philosopher. Wouldn't you agree?
Mining is not a business for intelligent people. It's very long term. It involves a lot of capital, a lot of patience, a lot of hard work, and the whole enterprise is becoming more necessary and more difficult at the same time.
You mentioned that we sat here a year ago, and indeed we did. I asked you then, Robert, on this stage, in fact, why the world hadn't woken up to the reality that it will need more, a lot more, raw materials, especially minerals, to electrify the planet and break humanity's addiction to fossil fuels. And I would say that in those 12 months, the world has, in fact, woken up to this reality, but not the way that you hoped it would. What we have instead is protectionism in the form of tariffs and sanctions. We have resource nationalism and a rush to achieve self-sufficiency. Where is this headed?
Only Allah knows. You're right. All of the things you said are true. First of all, everything we touch, we either grew it agriculturally or we mined it. Mm-hmm. And the development of the North Field here in Qatar is critical. The LNG industry is critical for the world if we're going to stop burning coal, for example, or if we're going to stop overutilizing crude oil. And so it's appropriate that we sit here right next to the world's largest natural gas field, which is going to provide the base load we need to have any hope of energy transition. So the problem is nobody even knows what energy is. This audience can't even define the word energy. So let's talk about that.
Well, what I'm getting at, and you know exactly what I'm getting at, is that for the moment, Qatar's LNG is welcome all around the world. The Europeans need it, of course, so do the Chinese for that matter. But what I was describing earlier on, and what you might soon be living as a mining entrepreneur, is the weaponization of the supply chain.
Yes.
Not just what you referred to last year, the militarization. We have the weaponization of the supply chain. And that's why I'm asking you, where is this headed? This is something I know you've given thought to.
Well, we're balkanizing the world economy. We had a beautiful, integrated, just-in-time economy 10 years ago. As an American, if I went to Walmart, everything said made in China. And today, we're developing a just-in-case economy. There is a degree of weaponization. Different groups are splintering, but fortunately, the economy is sitting here in the Middle East. They have a very young and highly educated population, and sit in the middle between the Chinese-Russian side with a little bit of Iran and the American-European side, and perhaps we can find a way to stabilize this rush that's rather aggressive and dangerous, and really becoming quite viral. Now, mining is part of the supply chain, and a lot of the fundamental demand for our metals, like copper, that used to grow primarily for electric cars or the electrification of the world economy, are now also in demand from the military, and the military everywhere. And we have to be realistic about this, and we have to find a way to cooperate and prevent this from getting completely out of control.
If this geopolitical trajectory remains intact, how does that affect where Western companies like yours want to develop and ultimately mine ore?
The best mineral potential on this particular planet that is not yet developed sits in Islamic countries, in deserts. We're no longer allowed to mine where it rains or snows more than it evaporates, because there's a danger of water pollution. You can see the controversy around a copper mine in Panama recently in that regard. But desert environments have a lot of metal. Saudi Arabia has a metal endowment, for example. Most of the Islamic countries, Pakistan, Afghanistan, have huge mineral potential. Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, parts of North Africa. So there are still parts of the planet that are underexplored with new technology, and it's possible for the mining industry to sustainably develop high-quality metal production. But there's no point in doing that if we're going to create a huge amount of global warming gas to mine that copper.
What I'm curious about is, if that's the case, this part of the world, up until now, has done a very effective job managing its relationships with the West, and principally the U.S. on one hand, and China on the other hand. If the world's future copper supply lies here, and copper is, as some, including Jeff Curry, the well-known commodity strategist, has said copper is the new oil. How do those tensions play out here?
I'm hoping that the young population in the GCC countries plays a buffer role between the West and the other side. I'm hoping that we find a way to cooperate or compete in a stable set of rules, because right now it's getting a little messy. If you start breaking down a beautifully integrated world economy, it's wildly inflationary. Right now, America is banning Chinese solar cells into the American economy, so that means solar cells are going to be much more expensive in the United States. And so we see this sort of phenomenon happening top to bottom. We're here because we're interested in finding partners from this part of the world that can help us access unexplored parts of the country where we need an appropriate partner. We're really trying to produce the metals we need to improve the global warming gas issue, but to do that in a green and sustainable way. That last caveat makes it really, really hard.
What changes, or perhaps doesn't change, if Donald Trump is elected president in November?
First thing he'll do is he'll probably start drilling for oil aggressively in the United States. The U.S. has a huge hydrocarbon endowment, both in natural gas and crude oil. And that would moderate energy prices and be quite a lift to the world economy. And
at a cost?
He'll probably stop subsidizing electric cars. Tesla really started off with U.S. government subsidies per car. There'll be a big change. And at the moment, the polls are indicating that that could well happen. We don't know for sure, of course. But this is another problem for the mining industry. We have to surf these kinds of political changes. We have to produce the metal at a very low cost in a very green and sustainable way. And we have to think decades ahead, no matter whether it's the Donald or not as the next president of the United States.
I do want to talk about electric vehicles. Irrespective of whether Donald Trump, were he to become president, eliminates subsidies, credits for the purchase of electric vehicles, demand for EVs has already started to wobble. It's decelerating, and if you're not BYD, or even Tesla for that matter, it's a question mark as to whether you can produce an EV profitably. Ford is losing some $100,000 on every single EV it produces. Do we, which is to say you and others in this room, need to reevaluate the assumptions that have been made about EV demand and ultimately EV sales?
We've been saying it's impossible for everybody to have an electric car. Literally impossible.
Well, the grid can't support it, right?
No, the grid can't support it, and we don't have enough, the battery technology isn't there yet. I think what we have in the United States is the early adopters have bought an electric car, sort of the techno geeks. But in China, there's a lot of adoption of electric cars, and so it varies from region to region. In the near future, there will be better and better battery technology. Gradually, that technology will improve, but this is the first correction in explosive growth. I think what we really need to look at before we build, say, 60 million electric cars in the United States is how we generate electrical energy and how we transmit it. Today, Texas has issued its 4th emergency, saying they might not get through the weekend on power supply. The grid could go down. The American electrical grid it's over 100 years old. And it's really not made for everybody to plug in an electric car at 5 p.m. anyway, which reminds this audience that America and Europe remain dependent on hydrocarbon from the Middle East for a long, long time. It'll be at least another generation or two before we truly get rid of hydrocarbon. What you're seeing is the first understanding of how challenging it is to change everything all at once.
I'm glad you brought up batteries because I want to ask you about technological disruption in the battery industry. Much of the enthusiasm for metals like nickel and cobalt in particular has been born of electrification and the need, of course, to store electricity in batteries. But what if companies like CATL, the gigantic Chinese battery developer, are successful in replacing today's vanguard lithium-ion technology with something else, perhaps sodium-ion technology, or maybe even something along the lines of a solid-state battery or an organic battery, or even something else for that matter?
100% for sure, better battery technology is coming. We started with, well, we go back to lead-acid batteries, and then we had nickel hydride batteries, little ever-ready batteries, and now we have lithium-ion batteries. And definitely in 5 years, there'll be a whole new generation of battery technology. Out of MIT, the Americans think it'll be based on lithium metal. And once you have lithium metal, you do not need nickel, you do not need cobalt, you do not need graphite. So when you change the battery technology, you change the metals you need. And our problem in the mining industry is we have to hang around with the technologists and see where technology is going 5 or 10 years from now. And then we have to scamper ahead and get a hold of those metals and get them in production to enable anything to happen, because without us, all is lost. These lights wouldn't be on without us. And it's the same for the North Field, in fact. The whole world is dependent on LNG, and it's really important to emphasize the significance of LNG to the world energy market. It can't be overemphasized enough.
Robert, you made the point moments ago that if America were to produce 60 million electric vehicles per year, there's no way they could all plug into the grid, let alone in Texas, of course, where they're not sure they're going to have enough power this weekend. What about artificial intelligence? It consumes an awful lot of electricity.
So a lot of people get the idea that the internet is green. There is nothing whatsoever green about the internet. When you do a Google search, you take your little finger and go, boop, and you're using a quantum of electrical energy about the same as running a 100-watt light bulb for 10 seconds. When you do an AI search, boop, you're using up to 30, 35 times more energy, or enough to run that light bulb for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 minutes. And so as the world adopts artificial intelligence, the energy demand will go to infinity. Because if my drone coming to kill you has a lower latency than the other, if my drone is quicker, faster to find you with AI, you die, I don't. So the military demand for AI will go to infinity, the energy demand will go to infinity, and that will have to compete with things like crypto mining, which is another energy obscenity. Huge amounts of energy being sort of used up for nothing. In the gold mining industry, we use a lot of energy to mine gold. I think most of the world's gold mines could close today, and humanity wouldn't be materially worse off. The problem is that we have to get together and figure out what we really need. We definitely need an expansion of the North Field in the short term to maintain energy stability in Europe, because those pipelines to Europe were cut, you know, Nord Stream 1 and 2. And we definitely need to find a way to mine clean metals to have any dream of an alternative. And the scale and the difficulty of the transition has to be discussed here.
Some people get that it makes sense to have more resources. There's a $43 billion takeover battle right now between BHP and Anglo American. How do you think it gets resolved?
Well, you know, we know these guys. I have a very high opinion of some of the managers because we work with BHP at the moment. But it's irrelevant how it gets resolved, because the takeover in and of itself, a bigger fish swallowing a smaller fish, or the smaller fish turning around and swallowing the bigger fish, doesn't create any new mines. So that's all about copper. That's really the bigger fish is coveting the copper of the smaller fish. But you don't create any new copper on this planet you're really just picking which management team is going to develop that copper. And everybody knows we need copper. As we came in here yesterday, we were trading a nominal all-time high. But Goldman Sachs says we're just in the early foothills of the Himalayas on the copper price if we're really going to stop burning crude oil.
Well, the managers you're speaking of were, of course, BHP's Mike Henry on the one hand and Anglo American's Duncan Wanblad on the other hand. Do you ever worry that Mike Henry comes after you?
Oh, that's already been tried, and it was reported by the FT. The fact that all the mining companies look at each other with a view towards consolidating shows you how hard it is to find a new mine. If it were easy to find a new mine, everybody would go out and get their own mine, and instead they're all coveting each other's girlfriend and trying to get her. But it's not creating any new girlfriends. So we're really 30, 40 years behind in finding new mines. Most of the money in the world went into internet and broadband and all kinds of other very exciting technologies. The mining industry has been underinvested for a generation. And it's only recently that people are waking up to the scale of the problem and the opportunity. And as a consequence of this, vast fortunes will be made and vast fortunes will be lost in people that don't understand the disruption we're facing. In war, the price of metals goes way up. If you study World War I, in World War II, we stopped making our pennies out of copper. We made them out of zinc because the copper was needed for the war effort. And you know how many bombs are flying around and missiles in the world. None of the copper in that weaponry is recycled. I'd like to see the world calm down and live peacefully, and my sincere hope is that it's the young people in the GCC countries that we're meeting have a very critical role to play because they're very well educated, these countries are very well governed, and they have the energy endowment. The combination of a young population and energy endowment, where else do you find that but in this region?
Robert, I began this conversation by talking, or saying at least, how to be successful, as you have been, as a miner, you need to be an entrepreneur first and foremost, but perhaps a philosopher as well. You're something else beyond those two, which is a disruptor in a way that I think many in this room might find a little surprising, given your background. Tell us about this way in which you're converting electricity, a new form, a new way, as it were, of turning electricity into power.
Well, everybody may be familiar. First of all, a lot of people don't even know what electricity is. Most people think electrons move down a copper wire. If we run a poll and ask people who think that, most people raise their hand, but it's not true. An electromagnetic field moves down a copper wire. So there's been a long debate in the United States between Thomas Alva Edison on one side and Nikola Tesla and George Westinghouse on the other side, whether the world should run on direct current or alternating current. And
that debate is well over 100 years old.
97% of the electricity humanity uses is alternating current. There's still uses for direct current, but alternating current took over the world. But there's a third way to use electrical energy, which has been used only for strategic weaponry and national defense, which is how electrical energy can be compressed with superconductors, supercapacitors. And you can take the quantum of energy it takes to run that light bulb for 10 minutes and squeeze it and release it in a few billionths of a second. And you get the power of a nuclear power plant for a few billionths of a second.
In a pulse.
In a pulse. That's called pulse power. And pulse power, we have the right to develop that on a license from the French government. And we've worked with the French government for 19 years. And this is a more efficient way to use electrical energy across a very broad range of human endeavor. So we believe we will commercialize this third way to use electrical energy, which is inherently much more efficient than the way we've used electrical energy in the past.
So I know there's much more to come on this, but why does it matter?
Well, you know, if you can, the basic industrial processes, making coal, making steel, the way we make automobiles they use incredible amounts of energy. And a lot of the grid is burning hydrocarbon. If you go to the United States, 60% of the energy in our grid is non-renewables. it's coal or natural gas. If you can start having more efficient ways to make things with less power, you can shut off those dirty power plants and just stick with the cleaner ones. So it's very disruptive to have a new way to use electrical energy because we can just measure human progress and how much electrical energy we consume per person. So we're very excited to be at the bleeding edge of this. We've invested about $1 billion privately over a 20-year period. We've gotten support from the French government. And soon we're going to reveal this technology to the world. It has a lot of applications. And that's one of the exciting things we're talking about to our friends here in Qatar, in this region.
Well, I know that you have happen to know that you're putting a lot of your own personal time and attention into this technology and that news is forthcoming. Share with us what you can.
Well, you know, we've been a private company for over 20 years, so we're thinking about becoming a public company in the next few years. So we're retaining American bankers. We're a quintessentially American company. And we have a number of strategic investors that are joining us to develop this new way to use electrical energy. And it's very useful in the hydrocarbon industry. It's very useful in the agricultural industry. It's very useful to find water. There's a shortage of water in this part of the world. It's very useful to crush and grind rock with less energy, and very useful to make things out of metal, all with less energy. So before we leave just our footprints in the sand, we'd like to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Life is short, and when you're a grandfather like me, you start thinking about the younger generation. And I feel very strongly this part of the world, the young people in this part of the world are going to be part of the solution. I'm super happy with the younger people I'm meeting here that are half my age, that are in positions of authority in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, and in the UAE.
As they say, watch this space. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Friedland.
Thank you.